The crime of the century. Who really took the Lindbergh baby? Imagine this. It's a quiet night and your child is sleeping peacefully in their crib. But when you come to check in, they're gone, vanished without any trace. On March 1st, 1932, Charles Lindbergh Jr., a 20 months old son of famed aviator Charles Lindbergh, was kidnapped from his own crib, setting off a nationwide frenzy. But the question still haunts us. Who took him? Was justice really served when a man was convicted of the crime? Or was there something far darker at play? In the spring of 1932, one of the most shocking and heart-wrenching crimes in American history took place. A crime that would not only capture the attention of the nation, but would also haunt the Lindbergh's family forever. It was a crime that combined elements of mystery, tragedy, and media frenzy. One that would forever change the way the public viewed kidnapping cases. This is a story of the kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh Jr. The victim, the 20 months old son of famed aviator Charles Lindbergh and his wife Anne Morrow Lindbergh. The crime itself was bold, calculated, and cruel, setting the stage for what would become known as the crime of the century. But the aftermath of this horrific event would lead to the complex and controversial investigation, a trial that could captivate the nation, and a family left to deal with the emotional and psychological dimensions that no parent should ever have to endure. Tonight, we're going to revisit the details of the haunting crimes, explore the chilling events leading up to the kidnapping, and the controversial trial that would follow. And we will ask, was justice truly served for the Lindbergh's family, or were there darker forces at play? Charles Lindbergh Jr. was born on June 22, 1930, to Charles Lindbergh and Anne Morrow Lindbergh, two of the most famous and admired figures of their time. Charles Lindbergh, of course, was the aviator who's made history in 1927 when he became the first person to fly non-stop from New York to Paris, from continent to another continent. His accomplishment made him an international hero, and he and his wife Anne seemed to live a charmed life, wealthy, successful, and admired by the world. But on March 1st, 1932, their world would shatter forever. On that night, Charles Lindbergh Jr., the couple's beloved 20 months old son, was taken from his own crib. The family's house, a large, isolated estate in Hopewell, New Jersey, was peaceful, too peaceful. The child's bedroom was on the second floor, a floor that was, at the same time, only accessible with staircase or the bedroom window. At approximately 10 p.m., Anne Morrow Lindbergh checked on her son, only to discover that he was missing. The window to his room was opened, and there were signs of a struggle. A ransom note was found nearby, written in a somewhat crude hand, demanding $50,000 for a safe return of the child. This was no simple kidnapping. This was a meticulously planned crime. The ransom note was specific. It demanded the sum in cash, with instructions on how to pay. It was clear that the kidnapper had been watching the Lindbergh's family closely and had prepared for this moment. But there was something even more chilling about this crime. Charles Lindbergh Jr. wasn't just a random victim. The Lindberghs were public figures, and this crime targeted them precisely because of their fame and their wealth. After receiving the ransom note, Lindbergh immediately contacted the police. But instead of being helpful, the police seemed overwhelmed, and the case was complicated by an overwhelmed amount of public attention. As the days passed, the Lindberghs reached additional ransom note, but no one had seen or heard from a child. And as the investigation grew, so did the media frenzy. Reporters from across the world swarmed to Hopewell, New Jersey, hoping for any shred of information. But despite of the mounting pressure, the case seemed to be going nowhere. Until then, on May 12, 1932, a horrific discovery was made. The body of Charles Lindbergh Jr. was then found by a truck driver on a sidewalk of the road just a few miles from the Lindbergh's estate. The child had been dead for several weeks, and it was clear that he had been murdered. The discovery of the child's body was devastating to the Lindbergh's family. The ransom had been paid, but the child was never returned alive. And as the autopsy was conducted, the details of the child's death revealed more disturbing facts. The cause of death was determined to be a blow to the head, but there was also evidence that the child had been held for a period of time before his death. The conclusion was clear. This was not just a kidnapping for ransom. It was a brutal and senseless murder. As the investigation unfolded, suspicious turned towards a man named Bruno Hauptmann. Hauptmann was the German immigrant who had worked as the carpenter and handyman in that area. He had a criminal history, including a conviction for petty theft, and he had been living in the United States for several years. He seemed like an unlikely suspect at first, but the authorities soon discovered something that would change the course of the investigation. Hauptmann had been in possession of some of the ransom money. In fact, he had been found with the large portion of $50,000 that had been paid to the kidnapper. But how he ended up with all that money? Was he involved in the kidnapping, or was all this just a coincidence? The evidence against Hauptmann seemed to mount. Investigators discovered that he has been in the area of Lindbergh's estate on the night of the kidnapping. There were even reports that Hauptmann had made several attempts to use the ransom money in New York, raising even more suspicions about his involvement. But Hauptmann maintained his innocence. He claimed that he had no involvement in that crime and that he has simply came into possession of the money by chance. Despite this denials, Hauptmann was arrested and charged with the kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh Jr. The trial that followed was one of the most publicized and controversial in American history. The whole nation watched as Hauptmann's fate hung in the balance, with some believing he was guilty and others convicted him as innocent. The trial of Bruno Hauptmann was the spectacular, with the prosecution processing a demanding case against him. The evidence, including the ransom money, the handwriting samples, and eyewitnesses' testimony, seemed to point directly to Hauptmann. But the defense argued that the case was based on the circumstantial evidence and that Hauptmann was the victim of a rush to judgment. After months of testimony and deliberations, the jury reached its verdict. Bruno Hauptmann was found guilty of kidnapping and murder. He was sentenced to death. But even as Hauptmann was being led away to prison, the case continued to stir controversies. Some believe that the Hauptmann had been framed and that the true killer was still out there. In 1936, Bruno Hauptmann was executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing prison in New York. But the questions surrounding the Lindbergh case would never be fully answered. Was Hauptmann really guilty? Or had he appeared to be a victim of a misarranging of justice? The truth remains elusive to this day. So, what really happened to Charles Lindbergh Jr.? Was Bruno Hauptmann true killer? Or was there more to this case that met the eye? Over the years, many theories have emerged, each one more disturbing than the previous. Some believe that Hauptmann was indeed guilty, pointing to the evidence and his suspicious behavior. But others argue that he was framed and that someone else were responsible for this crime. One theory suggests that the Lindbergh family itself was involved in the crime. Could it be that the case was staged to cover up some darker secrets? Others have speculated that the Lindbergh's family themselves may have had something to do with the kidnapping, either intentionally or accidentally, and that Hauptmann was simply the scapegoat. Another theory proposes that the real killer was someone who was never caught, a stranger perhaps, or even a member of the Lindbergh's household who had a hidden motive. The mystery surrounding the crime remained unsolved, and with each passing year, new questions continue to arise. The kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh Jr. remains one of the most tragic and mysterious crimes in American history. The case, with all its twists and turns, has left an indelible mark on the Lindbergh's family, the nation, and the whole world. And even now, till these days, nearly a century later, the questions continue. Was justice served? Or was there more to this case than anyone realized? Thank you for joining me as we explore the dark chapter in our history. If you have your own theories, I'd love to hear them. Leave your comments below and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories that will leave you questioning everything.